Another serial killer one for you guys today, but this one I totally remember from the late 1980s. I remember hearing about it, but I never really dug into it before now. I don't usually do a lot of serial killer cases because they kill too many people, and it's hard to do like an in-depth on each victim, which I think should be the point. I think a lot of times it's too much about the killer. So I actually started my true crime obsession with serial killers, but once I discovered that sometimes quote unquote normal people commit murders, I actually switched to an obsession with people who kill their own family members and loved ones. But I'm going to try and tackle this story because it has an interesting Calgary connection, which is my hometown. But get ready because this one is brutal. It is the stuff of horror movies that they are made from. This is the murders committed by Charles Ng and Leonard Lake. On the afternoon of June 2nd, 1985, two men, one with a beard and rather scruffy looking, the other a pudgy man with glasses of Asian descent, entered a hardware store on the south end of San Francisco. They were there to purchase a vise because theirs had broken. And by purchase, I mean the pugly. He is kind of pugly. And by purchase, I mean the pudgy man took it and then walked out of the store without paying for it, and then put it into the trunk of the car that they had arrived in. Only it just so happened at that time that an off duty police officer saw what he did and then went over to talk to him, and the man noticed him approaching him and then fled on foot. Then the scruffy bearded man came out and said, "No, no, no, don't worry. I just paid for it." So the officer asked for his ID, and the man handed it to him, but the ID didn't look at all like the guy that was standing in front of him, who claimed to be Robin Stapley. Now, Robin Stapley had been a man that had been reported missing the week before from San Diego. In the bag that the pudgy man had dropped was a gun with an illegal silencer on it. So the scruffy looking man was taken to the police station to be questioned about this ID of his, of why he had the ID on him of this missing man. And to ask also about why his friend had this gun on him. So the man told him his real name was Leonard Lake and that the man that had been with him was Charles Ng. Then he asked for a pencil and paper and a glass of water. And Leonard scribbled a note to his wife. And then, as he had sort of prepared for this day, he had sewn a couple of cyanide pills into the collar of his shirt. He took them out, swallowed them, and then before the police could stop him, he was rushed to the Kaiser Hospital, but he died 4 days later. The license plate on the 1980 Honda Prelude that Charles had put this vice into was registered to Leonard Lake, but the vehicle itself was registered to a man named Paul Costner. Now, Paul had disappeared from San Francisco in November of the previous year. So, when examining the car, they noticed that there was like a bullet hole in the roof of the car and some blood splatter. There was also a stun gun in there. So, under the passenger seat, they found an electric bill in the name of Clara Lynn Ballas with an address. So, they paid her a visit. Now, Clara Lynn, it turns out, was Leonard's ex wife. She told Lieutenant Gerald McCarthy that her and Leonard had divorced about 3 years before that, but they were still friendly with each other. She mentioned that her family had this plot of land out in Wiselyville, which they hadn't used in years. There was a cabin on there, and perhaps Leonard had been staying there. So they asked her if she would be willing to take them out there and let them look around. And she said, no problem. And when they pulled up, it was pretty obvious that someone had been living there. I mean, the first thing they noticed was there was a lot of vehicles parked on the land. And when running the registrations, there was one of the trucks had been registered to Robin Stapley. And then there was another car registered to Lonnie Bond, who was another man that had been reported missing. Lonnie Bond had rented a cabin not actually far from Clara Lynn's family's cabin. He had been staying there with his girlfriend, Brenda O'Connor, and their little baby. Robin was a friend of theirs and had been staying with them. They had all been reported missing, and then the rented cabin was found empty with the rent not being paid. like for the past few months. In a bedroom in the Lake's cabin was some video equipment that belonged to Harvey Dubbs. And Harvey had a wife named Deborah, and then they had a baby son named Sean. And they had also all been reported missing. And then they found this dungeon, which we're going to come back to. Leonard had led a rather disturbing life. He had been born in San Francisco, but his parents, I know his mom's name's Gloria. I don't know anything about his dad. They split up when he was really little. Him and his sisters went to live with their grandma. And grandma didn't really have an issue with Leonard's habit for taking pictures of his sister in the nude. Now, since she didn't do anything to stop that, he moved on to extorting his sisters for sexual favors. He also developed a fascination with capturing mice and then dissolving their little bodies in a variety of chemicals and then watching the decomposition process. So after high school, he enlisted in the Marine Corps, because that makes sense, and served 2 tours in Vietnam as a radar technician. But he had a bit of a breakdown while he was there, and he was diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder. Now, he did get therapy and medication, but he was medically discharged in 1971. He then joined a commune out on a 5,600-acre settlement out near Capella in California, where he briefly married a woman, but that didn't work out long when she found out that he was making amateur porn videos involving bondage. So a few years later, while still living on this commune, he met Clara Lynn, who was called Cricket by her friends, and then they got married. Now, it has been reported that Clara Lynn participated in some of Leonard's porn movies, but he was never charged or implicated in any later crimes. She was never charged or implicated in any later crimes. Then, when the owner of the commune discovered that Leonard had been building this bunker in preparation for a nuclear holocaust, they ordered him off of the commune. And then the couple, him and Carolyn, started to manage this hotel. And then in December of 1981, he placed an ad in this survivalist magazine for what I don't know, but Charles Ing was the one that answered the ad, then quickly actually moved in with Clara Lynn and with Leonard. So Charles was he was on the run from the military police for stealing weapons and then facing a court martial. So he had escaped custody and made his way to California, which is when he met Leonard and Clara Lynn. He had been born on Christmas Eve in 1960 in Hong Kong to very wealthy parents. He had 3 younger siblings, claims that his father was abusive. He grew up to be a loner, got expelled from school after school. So by the age of 15, he was a compulsive shoplifter, and somehow his dad had gotten him a student visa to move him to California to go to Notre Dame, of all places, in 1978. But he dropped out, of course, and then he got involved in this hit and run. So to get out of trouble, he enlisted in the Marines using false documents, and after a year in is when he was caught stealing weapons from Kanohi Bay's base. Federal agents raided the mobile home where they were all living in 1982, found a stash of illegal weapons and explosives. Leonard was released on bail, and instead of facing the charges, he hid at Clara Lynn's family's cabin. Now, Charles was taken into custody by the Marines. He pled guilty at that time to charges of theft and desertion and served 18 months in Leavenworth in Kansas. He was then paroled and dishonorably discharged in 1984 and returned to California to reconnect with Leonard, who was divorced by this point. So while he had been gone, Leonard had built himself this little dungeon, which was uncovered by detectives on that fateful day in June of 1985. So investigators at the scene noticed this bunker built of like cinder blocks in this dark chamber was shackles bolted to the cinder block walls and a chair. Now, the bunker had in it 3 rooms. One had a bed in it with like a foam mattress with a bucket and some rolls of toilet paper. This room also had this one-way mirror installed, so whoever was in it could be watched from one of the other rooms. And on the property, they found a number of shallow graves containing a total of 40 pounds of charred and crushed up human remains. The remains were traced back to 11 different missing persons. Two of the bodies had been gagged and then killed with gunshots to the head. They also found what I guess they could describe as like a treasure map with drawings that led them to two 5-gallon buckets that were buried. In one of the buckets was the IDs and personal possessions of 25 different people, and Leonard's journal, which spanned from 1983 to 1984. There was also two videotapes. Now, the contents of the videos have never, of course, been released, but apparently they are beyond horrific. They basically portray the a torture of two women while Leonard sits in a lazy boy chair and tells them what he's about to do to them. Quote, I believe that if I can construct a holding cell, a place where I can put such a woman, a facility that is so stark and so empty, so cold, so quiet, so totally removed from the world, that I can quickly condition a young woman to cooperate with me fully, end quote. Now, in one of the videos, Charles tells the woman that's in the video, you can cry and stuff like the rest of them, but it won't do you any good. We are pretty cold hearted, so to speak. Now, both videos show a woman tied to a chair. Now, in the first tape, the woman asks, like, why are you doing this to me? And Leonard says, because I hate you. In the other tape, a woman is beaten and whipped so badly that there's no way she could have lived through that. So rather than go through like the list of evidence, try to piece together a chronological story and confuse you with a bunch of names, I want to go through each victim's story and just tell you who each person was in life. So you kind of have to bear with me. There is a lot of them, of course. And just a warning that a couple of them are children. Their names and their stories are important. So then I will continue on with what happened. Donald Lake. So this was Leonard's brother. He was 32. He had served in the army. He was living with their mom, Gloria, in San Francisco. In December of 1982, Leonard stopped by on his way up north and asked if Donald wanted to come with him. And Donald had always been kind of mistreated by Leonard, but he said he'll go with him, and then he was never seen again. His mom did report him missing because Leonard said he had no idea where he'd run off to. Leonard had used Donald's ID to rent a house in Golden Gate Park in 1983. Now, this was during the time that Charles was in Leavenworth, so he wasn't implicated in his murder, but Donald's body has never been found. Charles Gunner, he was 36 years old. He had worked as a postal worker and a drama coach in Morgan Hill. Charles had been Leonard and Clara Lynn's best man at their wedding. He was interested in survival skills, and on May 22nd, 1983, Leonard had invited him out to Las Vegas for some rest and relaxation after his divorce. And Gunner had left his two little girls with a babysitter and was never seen again. Leonard showed up in his van a few days later and told the babysitter that Charles had run off with a woman. Jeffrey Askren was 30 years old and was the son of Bruce and Doris. They were from Sunnyvale. Once attended Mount Vernon High School and then moved to California in 1978. He disappeared in April of 1984. His abandoned Honda was found in the West Point area of Calaveras County, which was close to the ranch that was in Wiselyville. Donald Guletti was 36 years old. He was a radio DJ from San Francisco. He lived with his brother Richard Carazaza. And on July 11th, 1984, he answered a knock on the door and then was immediately shot in the head by Charles Ng. His boyfriend Richard was also shot in the chest when he ran in from the back room to see what the commotion was about. He was left for dead, but miraculously survived and managed to call 911. Harvey, Deborah, and Sean Dubs. So Harvey was a 29-year-old video equipment salesperson, married to Deborah, who was 33, and their baby son, Sean, who was about a year old. Harvey had put an ad in the paper selling some of his video equipment on July 25th when the doorbell rang while Deborah was speaking with a friend on the phone. She told her friend that she had to go because the two men had come that had answered the ad from earlier. None of them were ever seen again, although um, sadly, I think Deborah is reported to be the woman in the second videotape that was sexually assaulted multiple times and then essentially beaten to death. One of their neighbors identified Charles Ng as the man that was leaving their house carrying a box and a vehicle that left their driveway the next day. The neighbor was concerned enough to try to follow the vehicle, but lost them in traffic. A man calling himself Jim Bright called Harvey's job to tell them that he had moved to Washington. There was a receipt found in Harvey's name for something on the ranch, but his body was never found, and neither was little Sean's. Um, if you were hoping I'd be done soon with the list of names, nope. I still have a few more to go, and these are just the names that they can tie directly to Charles and Leonard. Randy Jacobson was 36. He disappeared on October 1984 from his rooming house in Haight-Ashbury after getting into some kind of business deal with Leonard. Randy was married to his wife, Cheryl Okoro. There is rumors that Cheryl disappeared as well, but her remains have not been found. She's not listed as an official victim of the two of them. Randy was referred to as a PP3 in Leonard's journal. His body was found covered in lime and buried on the property. They were not able to determine his cause of death. Paul Costner on November 2nd, 1984. He was 40 years old. He was last seen in San Francisco. He was a used car dealer, and his gold 1980 Honda Prelude also disappeared with him. He had placed the vehicle for sale in like the paper and then told his fiance that the guy that was coming to buy it was a little bit weird. He left their apartment at 7:30 that night to meet them. He never returned. Now this was the Honda that Leonard Lake was arrested driving in June. Clifford Parenteau was 23. He was a mover with Dennis Moving Company in San Francisco. Charles Ng was one of his coworkers with whom he had a number of different arguments. He was last seen on January 20th. His body has never been found, but some of his belongings were found on the ranch. Jeff Gerald was 25. He also worked with Charles Ng at a different moving company by day, and then he played drums for a band called Crash and Burn by night. He disappeared February 24th, 1985, after telling a buddy of his that he was going to go help Charles move. Kathleen Allen, 18, and her boyfriend Michael Carroll, 23. They were living together in a motel room. On the night of April 12th, 1985, Michael told Kathleen that he was heading out on an errand around 10 o'clock and then he never returned. And a couple of days later, Kathleen got a phone call at the Safeway where she worked that her boyfriend had been involved in a shooting. So she takes off from work in a hurry and is last seen running out of the grocery store into the parking lot to talk to a guy that had a beard. Later, it was determined that that was probably Leonard. Kathleen was mentioned by name, but she wasn't seen in any of the videotapes that were found. Her last paycheck was sent to the address that she forwarded it to, or somebody forwarded it to, near Wiselyville. Michael's driver's license was found inside the cabin on the ranch. Robin Scott Stapley was 26 years old. Now, he normally went by Scott. He was living with a guy named Lonnie Bond, who was 27, and his girlfriend, Brenda O'Connor, and their little guy, little 2-year-old Lonnie Jr. Now, Lonnie Sr. was not a big fan of Leonard Lake, who lived in one of the neighboring cabins there, or was staying there anyways. They found him obnoxious. He was very rude and what they called demented. He would like to fire his guns off on the property at all days of the night. And Brenda, he got the creeps from him, which probably had a lot to do with him always asking her to pose naked for photos for him. On April 19th, Robin was visiting Lonnie, went outside with him to have words with Leonard sort of about this whole thing. And Robin and Lonnie disappeared right after that. Lonnie Jr. also disappeared, and Brenda was seen in one of the videos, forced at gunpoint to perform some sex acts on both Leonard and Charles. Robin's ID was on Leonard when he was finally arrested. That was the ID that he had on him. So that was a very long list. Now, Attorney General at the time, John Van Kemp, called it one of the worst cases in California history. There was a total of 21 missing persons that were tied to that ranch. They were able to locate two women that were found alive, but there were a lot more than on this list that they believed to be victims of Leonard and Charles. There's D. Myers, 25, of Saratoga. A piece of his identification was found, but they were not able to locate any of his relatives to verify if he was alive or dead. There was also the remains of two men of African American descent that were never identified. There was a lot of gruesome and disturbing evidence that was found on this creepy little ranch tying Leonard and Charles to all of these lovely people's murders. Obviously, Leonard was dead, and Clara Lynn didn't know anything about it, or at least she had asked for blanket immunity to help the police with what she did know. Didn't have any consequences from that. Like, little is actually known about Clara Lynn and what happened with her after any of this. I mean, she likely changed her name. But Charles was missing now at this point and needed to be found. Now, fortunately, Charles Ng is a bit of an idiot. On July 6, 1985, Sean Doyle was working as a security guard at the Hudson's Bay Company in downtown Calgary. For non-Canadians, that would be the Hudson's Bay. We just call it the Bay. It's a department store here. I mean, it's more than that. It has a long, deep-rooted Canadian settler history, but that is not for today's story. Today, it's just a department store. Now, the interesting story about this Sean Doyle man is that a number of years ago, when my son was in high school, he came to their school to give a talk about something, and he mentioned this whole story that I'm going to tell you, because it obviously affected him for the rest of his life. He has since passed away, since any of that has happened. Anyways, in walked Charles Ng on this day in July of 1985. Now, Sean Doyle had no idea who this guy was, that he was quite high up actually on the list of most wanted. He just knew that this guy at the time was trying to shoplift, and he tried to apprehend him. Only Charles, of course, pulled a gun on him and shot him through his hand. Now, Charles had made his way to Calgary, probably by hitchhiking. He had a sister living here, apparently, and built himself this makeshift tent in Fish Creek Park. Now, fortunately, in 1985, I was still living on the north end of town, nowhere near Fish Creek Park, where I now live. So he was charged with attempted murder and then shoplifting, and given a 6-year sentence here to be served in Edmonton in Alberta. Now, there was a couple of issues with that, though. Charles wasn't actually a U.S. citizen. He was only there on a long expired student visa. So there was a lot of this legal mumbo jumbo that had to be worked through, and he was finally ordered deported upon his release, for the Canadian charges that he had, and then extradited back to California, which is a death penalty state, in 1991. Now, he tried unsuccessfully to fight the extradition because Canada has this rule that they will not extradite people to a country where they could face the death penalty. But somehow they managed to get kind of around that, and the fact that technically he could have been deported to China and not the US. But fortunately, they found a way to get him into a California court, in which he was tried on 12 counts of first-degree murder. But Charles decided to try and delay matters as much as possible by filing a huge number of ridiculous pretrial motions, tried to sue the state of California for his glasses not being the right prescription, his food was too cold, and that he didn't have a proper place to fold origami in his cell. So all while in remand awaiting this trial at Folsom Prison, he was busy squirreling away maps, fake IDs, trying to get ready for an escape. And then, of course, he had to fire his lawyers. He finally went through a total of 10 of them, but filed a malpractice suit against most of them after firing them. I won't be surprised if Sarah Boone does that. If she now files, can she do that if she's convicted? Obviously, she can. It'll be interesting to see if she does that. Finally, he decided to represent himself, which again, always a good idea. I mean, it worked for Ted Bundy. Why not? Oh, wait, it didn't work for Ted Bundy. Anyways, finally in October of 1998, the trial went on for 4 months. It actually started. Now, Charles claimed that he was just a bystander to all of the murders and he hadn't done anything. He depended on Leonard and saw him as a father figure. But the videotapes and the evidence told a very different story. And while taking the stand in his own defense, he was shown a photo of himself in prison with cartoons that he had drawn of the victims hanging on his cell wall. He also got a hold of the personal phone number of one of the jurors and called them to try to force a mistrial. It did not work. And in February 1999, Charles was convicted of 11 of the 12 murders, 6 men, 3 women, and 2 male infants. He was found not guilty of Paul Costner's murder. No one's really sure why they decided that. His trial cost the state of California $20 million. It was the most expensive in the state's history. It was twice that of even the O.J. Simpson trial. On July 28th, 2022, his sentence was upheld. He still has a few appeals to go, and as of the time that I wrote this episode, which was in July of 2023, he is still on death row in San Quentin. Now, as of today, the Department of Justice is hopeful that there is enough usable DNA to run some comparisons until all of the victims are known. But unfortunately, there are too many other urgent cases that are kind of in front of that. So, like, there are about 100 more that they want to try to categorize and return what families. Um, return what remains they can to the proper families to give them a chance to, properly intern them. And that was the reign of terrible murders of Charles Ng and Leonard Lake. Like, why do they got to kill the babies? Like, they cannot identify you. Just drop them on a doorstep. I don't get it. And I really don't understand the robbery then murder part of it either. Um, like they weren't exactly living well off their stolen stuff. Like they were still living in a shack. I don't think I'll ever have a hope of understanding serial killers. I think they are just too warped. Now, anxiety and depression from trauma, I can totally understand that. Even addiction issues, like something bad happens, I will eat the contents of the fridge. This part I understand. But something bad that happens, and I'm going to take my neighbor's cat and dissect it and throw it in a vat of acid. Like, I struggle with understanding how that relieves anyone's anxiety or takes someone to their happy place. Anyways, I'm going to be back again with another case that I probably don't understand. In the meantime, you know what to do with your rate reviews. You can go onto the podcast, sign up for the exclusive episodes there. And you can follow me on Instagram. I do post some pretty good stuff there sometimes. I want to get a little bit more sort of interactive with you. So I don't know, start a Facebook group. I don't know. Does anybody use Facebook anymore? I have no idea. I'd like to take some listener questions. We'll see sort of what I do. In the meantime, feel free to reach out. I still get your emails. I do try to answer them. You can email me at amillionotherchoices@outlook.com. And as always, thank you so much for watching.